Imagine you're Alexander the Great. You've just crushed the Persian army and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. You stroll down the coast of Phoenicia in 332 BC. Every major city is surrendering and handing you their keys. Except for one. Tyre, the absolute crown jewel of the Mediterranean Sea. There's just one tiny problem. Tyre isn't on the mainland. It's an island, located 800 meters offshore. And its walls? They were incredibly high, plunging straight down into the deep, churning ocean. Alexander sends a polite message. Hey guys, just want to come over and sacrifice to Heracles. Open the gates? The Tyrians reply, yeah, no thanks. You can sacrifice on the mainland. We're good here on our unconquerable island. To prove their point, they literally throw Alexander's messengers off the top of those giant walls into the sea. Bad move. You don't say no to a guy who sleeps with a sword and a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. Alexander is furious. But his generals point out a very annoying reality. Sire, we are a land army. We have long spears, we have horses, we have sandals. We have exactly 0 ships. A normal general would pack up and leave. A normal general respects the basic laws of geography and physics. But Alexander looks at the ocean, looks at the island, and makes the most unhinged decision in ancient military history. If we can't sail to the city, he declares, pointing his spear aggressively at the water, we will bring the land to the city. We are building a road right through the ocean. To build a bridge 800 meters long across the ocean, you need a lot of rocks. Luckily, there was an old, abandoned city right on the coast. Alexander told his men, tear down that old city and throw it into the sea. And so, the ultimate construction project began. Thousands of engineers and soldiers worked day and night, dumping rocks, dirt, and timber into the Mediterranean. They cut down massive cedar trees from the mountains of Lebanon and drove them into the mud to hold the rocks together. At first, it was pretty easy going. The water near the mainland coast was shallow, only about a meter deep. The engineers were probably thinking, hey, this isn't so bad. We'll be done by Friday. But as they got closer to the island, the ocean floor suddenly dropped off. The water became 5 meters deep. Now, every rock they threw in seemed to just vanish into the deep blue nothingness. And to make matters worse, the Tyrian soldiers gathered on their massive walls to watch the show. They yelled insults. They called the Macedonians beasts of burden. They asked if Alexander thought he was Poseidon or something. Alexander, taking this entirely personally, basically told his men, throw dirt faster. The construction shifted into overdrive. The bridge started getting wider, deeper, and closer to the island. Slowly, the laughter on the walls of Tyre died down. The sandcastle was actually working. So, the Tyrians decided to stop trolling and start shooting. They unleashed a storm of arrows and projectiles at the workers. Suddenly, building a road wasn't just exhausting, it was a deadly game of dodgeball. Alexander needed to protect his men. To protect his workers from becoming human pincushions, Alexander ordered the construction of 2 massive siege towers. These weren't just any towers. They were 50 meters tall, made of solid wood, and covered in raw animal hides to prevent fires. They loaded the top floors with catapults and ballistas and started returning fire. It was ancient artillery warfare. The Tyrians suddenly found themselves dodging massive flying boulders. Building the bridge got a whole lot easier again. Safely behind their giant wooden bodyguards, the Macedonian engineers went back to dumping dirt into the ocean. But the Tyrians were master sailors and engineers themselves. They looked at those beautiful, flammable wooden towers and got an idea. They took an old horse transport ship and packed it full of dry branches, pitch, sulfur, and literally everything else that catches fire. They even hung giant cauldrons of oil from the ship's masts, balanced perfectly to spill forward when the ship crashed. On a day with perfect wind blowing straight toward the bridge, the Macedonians saw a lone Tyrian ship sailing right at them. At the last second, The Tyrian crew lit the whole thing on fire and literally jumped ship, swimming away to safety. The flaming missiles smashed directly into the Macedonian siege towers. The shock snapped the masts, dumping the boiling oil everywhere. Animal hides or not, the massive towers went up like giant ancient Roman candles. The engineers ran for their lives. Months of hard work were literally going up in smoke. To add insult to injury, a massive storm blew in right after, washing away a huge section of the dirt bridge. Mother Nature was siding with Tyre. Alexander watched his masterpiece burn and sink. A lesser man would have quit. Alexander? He just twitched and decided to double down. Instead of giving up, Alexander ordered his men to rebuild the bridge, but this time make it twice as wide. The Macedonian engineers, probably weeping internally, started throwing trees and rocks into the sea all over again. But Alexander finally admitted a hard truth. To beat a heavily armed island fortress, you kind of need ships. So he left his men to keep digging and went on a little shopping trip up the coast of Phoenicia. He visited the kings of Cyprus and other local cities who had already surrendered to him. His pitch was basically, hey, remember how you guys submitted to me? I'm gonna need to borrow your entire navy. Seeing as he had just crushed the Persian Empire and was standing right there with an army, they enthusiastically agreed. Within weeks, Alexander didn't just have a few boats. He had assembled a massive armada of over 200 fully equipped warships. Meanwhile, back at Tyre, the defenders were still feeling incredibly confident, laughing at the slow dirt bridge. Until one morning, a Tyrian guard looked out at the horizon, rubbed his eyes, and dropped his drink. The ocean was completely covered in a wall of ships, and they were all flying Alexander's colors. The Tyrian confidence evaporated instantly. They went from invincible island fortress to we are trapped in a cage in about 5 seconds. Alexander stood at the bow of his new flagship, probably looking incredibly smug. He immediately used his new fleet to blockade both of Tyre's harbors. Nobody could get in, and nobody could get out. With the Tyrian navy trapped in their ports, Alexander's engineers could finally finish building their giant dirt bridge in peace. With the sea under his control, Alexander decided that standard ships were too boring. He wanted floating destruction. He mounted massive catapults and battering rams onto his ships, turning them into floating siege towers. They sailed right up to the walls of Tyre and started blasting them point blank. But the Tyrians were brilliant. To keep the ships away, they started dumping massive stone blocks into the shallow water around the island. This created an underwater obstacle course. Alexander's ships couldn't get close enough to ram the walls, so the Macedonians dropped anchor and brought in crane ships to fish the rocks out of the water. But Tyre had another trick. They sent out squads of sneaky underwater divers. These divers swam right up to the anchored Macedonian ships and literally just cut their anchor ropes with knives. Without anchors, the ships would comically drift away in the wind, ruining hours of rock-clearing work. Alexander, deeply annoyed by this ancient Navy SEAL tactic, found a simple solution. He replaced all the anchor ropes with solid iron chains. Problem solved. The Tyrian divers tried to cut the chains, broke their little knives, and probably went home crying. With the ships firmly anchored, the Macedonians successfully hoisted the massive rocks out of the water, clearing a path. Finally, there was nothing left between Alexander's fleet and the walls of Tyre. It was time to knock. The ship-mounted battering rams hit the southern wall with the force of an earthquake. A massive section of the wall cracked and collapsed. The wall was breached. After 7 agonizing months of digging, drowning, and burning, the Macedonians finally had a way in. Alexander didn't just sit back and watch. He personally led his elite shock troops right into the breach. They threw wooden gangplanks over the rubble and swarmed the city like extremely angry bees. The Tyrians fought back with everything they had. They threw tridents, hot sand, and probably the kitchen sink, but it was too late. Once the Macedonian phalanx got a foothold inside, It was basically a steamroller. While Alexander took the main wall, his navy completely overran Tyre's northern and southern harbors. The remaining Tyrian ships were smashed to splinters, and the naval blockades were broken. Thousands of fresh Macedonian troops poured into the city from the ports. Tyre was now being attacked from the dirt bridge, from the sea, and from the inside. It was game over. Alexander himself fought like a one-man army, fighting with the rage of a guy who really hated building that dirt bridge. The remaining defenders finally realized that their unconquerable island was, in fact, conquered. The fighting spilled into the narrow streets, but the organized Macedonian war machine easily pushed them back. The Tyrian king and his top nobles retreated to the Temple of Agenor, locking the doors and hoping for a miracle. Spoiler alert, there was no miracle. They opened the doors and surrendered to a very dusty, very annoyed Alexander. After 332 years of standing completely undefeated, the invincible island of Tyre had fallen. Normally, Alexander was pretty chill if you surrendered to him early. He'd let you keep your local government and your customs. But if you made him spend 7 months building a dirt bridge in the ocean, oh, he was not chill. At all. To send a message, he had 2,000 Tyrian soldiers tied to wooden posts along the entire length of the beach. As for the rest of the population, about 30,000 citizens were packed up and sold into slavery. It was a brutal, ancient reality, but it definitely helped fund the rest of Alexander's world tour. But what about the king of Tyre and his nobles who hid inside the Temple of Agenor? Well, Alexander was actually highly religious. Because they sought sanctuary in a holy place, he totally pardoned them. Talk about a lucky break for the king. But the most lasting impact of this siege wasn't the casualties. It was the geography. Over time, sand accumulated around Alexander's dirt bridge. He literally rewrote the map. Tyre is still a peninsula today. The message to the rest of the world was crystal clear. If Alexander wants your city, he will take your city, even if he has to build an entirely new landmass to do it. With Tyre finally out of the way, Alexander dusted off his sandals and looked south. Next stop, Egypt. Hopefully, there wouldn't be any more islands along the way. His engineers really couldn't take it anymore. Word of what happened at Tyre spread across the ancient world faster than a plague. When Alexander finally reached Egypt, they didn't even try to fight. They basically handed him the keys to the country and asked him to be their pharaoh. And the craziest part of this whole story? If you go to Lebanon today, Tyre is still a peninsula. He permanently changed the map of the earth just because a city told him he couldn't come inside to pray. So what's the lesson here? If an obstacle seems impossible, most people turn around. But if you're Alexander the Great, you just throw the entire mainland into the ocean until the obstacle stops existing. As for his engineers, they probably spent the rest of their lives having nightmares about dirt. Alexander went on to conquer the rest of the known world, never losing a single battle. Because when your solution to an enemy navy is to literally build a new landmass, nobody really wants to fight you anymore. Thanks for watching this crazy piece of ancient history. If you enjoyed watching Alexander's engineers suffer, do them a favor and hit that like button, and make sure to subscribe. Alexander is literally holding a spear to the subscribe button right now. Don't make him angry. He might come build a bridge to your house. Ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical deep dive. See you next time on Greek Empire Stories.